We are super excited that you're all here. Thanks for welcoming. Thanks for christening the chat as well. But we are going to be diving into how architects can win more projects with developers. And the way that we're going to do that is we're actually going to talk about what's usually wrong first, right? So why aren't developers excited by, attracted to the proposals that you are putting together, and what you can do to change that? So um, we're going to start off with kind of like why developers are different, right? Than the other clients that you're typically speaking to, and what they actually care about. What you need to actually identify with them about what matters most, and then how to take what you learn and actually build that into the proposal, and build it in a way that actually speaks to them. So by the end of this, you're going to know exactly where you're going wrong, and you're going to know what to do to win more of those projects with developers. And for those of you amazing, wonderful people that do stick around for the end, Aaron and the team at Arcol have put together an awesome playbook based on everything that we're going to talk about here, that you can take with you, as well as templates for the proposals, right, Aaron? So you can jump right in and start using those too. So lots of amazing value being shared by Aaron and team. Okay, cool. So now that that setting is up, let's dive into Aaron. Right, Aaron. Like everyone's like, "What's going on, Aaron? What's up here?" So Aaron is wonderful. He has so many years of sales experience here, which is awesome. But he's also the head of growth, head of product. I actually forget every time I say you, Aaron. Uh,
Growth.
Head of growth, yes. So head of growth at Arcol. And Aaron, can you give us a quick introduction to Arcol and to your role there?
Yeah, definitely. So, hi everybody. Thanks for having me. Like Tyler said, so I have been working in software and in tech for roughly 15 years. Lots of time on the product side of things, and more recently in growth, which is more of kind of an all-encompassing role. But I cut my teeth in sales, and I think one of the cool things that I'm sure we'll get into a little bit today is applying some of that salesmanship and some of the same best practices to everything that you are all doing and everything that we're going to talk about today. So, happy to chat on that a little bit more. And then as far as a little bit of background on Arcol, so Arcol is a collaborative constructible design tool. And to kind of like pull the different threads of that and what that actually means is we started as basically solving the problem that I'm sure everybody on this call has experienced of just an easier to use design tool. My kind of go-to line is like a lot of folks will use things like Revit for like conceptual designs, and it's like using a sledgehammer to kill a fly. It's just way too much tool. It's slow, it's clunky. I think everybody knows all those things. So that's kind of where we started. Over the last little while, what we've layered in is the collaborative part of it. So adding in multiplayer design, having multiple users inside of the same design file, inside of the same presentation, seeing changes live, all those things. And now kind of our most recent stage is focusing more on the constructible side of things. And really what that means is layering in a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today, the languages of what people want to get out of models. So, where an architect may be thinking in square footage and in FAR and all of these different things, a structural engineer will be thinking in columns, and a developer will be thinking in budgets, and et cetera, et cetera. And so all of those things being visible inside of Arcol as you design has kind of been the most recent layer that we've been working on. So with this in mind, we talk with folks from every side of the aisle, designers, developers, GCs, everything, quite a bit all week. And yeah, that's me and Arcol in a nutshell.
Yes, and that's awesome. What I'm most excited about, and I think what led us to having this conversation here with you, with all of you, is that Arcol does have a ton of conversations with developers and a ton of conversations with firms that are working with developers, right? And so you have a good sense of what they care about, what matters most to them. And so that's what we're trying to do here, is to bridge this gap and to just call out all of the things that are just easy changes everyone here that can make to really resonate better with the developer audience, because we know they're different, right? This is a different audience. They care about different things. Cough, cough, profit, which is fine. But we want to make sure that we're actually speaking their language. So let's get a sense for some people in the room really quick. I want to know like what part developers play in your work today. So drop a one in the chat if they are a big part of your pipeline already. Drop a two in the chat if you've done some work with developers, but not a ton. And drop a three if you've tried to win some work, but you just haven't won any yet. Where are we at? Good mix. Good mix, Aaron.
Okay. Seen a lot of
Sometimes
ones.
there's a clear winner, but actually in this one, we're getting a really good mix of all of them.
Yeah. lot of ones. I think ones, and that tracks. Big part of the pipeline.
Yeah, big part of the pipeline for sure. One, two, and three. Thanks, Chris. covering covering all the bounds. Some developer clients, but would love to have more. Yes, Steve's right
Nice.
on that one.
Yeah.
That's a good place to be in. And I know that I don't want everyone to get scared away by us dropping the S word, the sales word, but it is so important to understand and to develop these skills to improve how you are communicating your value. That's really how it. Sales is a broad term, but a better way to describe it is like value communication, right? That's what sales is communicating your value. You were
Yeah,
gonna say,
that's
Aaron.
like well, that's just a bit of an aside. Like I had the same thing, like nobody likes this sales guy or girl. That's kind of the prevailing wisdom in every industry. That's not unique to this, but I've always looked at sales as it's just storytelling. That's all it is. It's
Mm,
effective
that's a good way to say
storytelling
it
and
too.
effective communication. And we'll dive into some of that today.
And to kind of tee us up here, Aaron, what was it? I mean, we had talked about ways to bring the most value to the people here, but this was an idea that came to you at an event relatively recently, right? What happened there?
Yeah, yeah. So we were at like I said, so Arcol is a software that serves primarily architects, but I'd say that that's starting to blend quite a bit more into developers and GCs using our Arcol as well. And we were at more of a construction focused event last year, and we were talking about this idea of one of the big practices that we preach all the time is multiplayer design, get everybody into the same tool, break down silos, clear lines of communication. I don't need to hark on that too much. And we got a lot of really good feedback on the tool and how it would be useful and inside of the process and all of those things. But we started to hear really consistent themes from every non-designer, non-architect that we talked to. And I don't think that necessarily everybody on this call is guilty of all these sins, but it seems like there's a prevailing set of themes that come up from the other side of the fence, especially with developers when we're talking about how they work with architects. And it was three main things. Proposals take too long, which is not that surprising. Everybody wants everything faster. Again, I don't think that's unique. Problem number two is that it's a black box once the process actually starts, and they feel like they are generally left in the dark. It's like, great, we got the project, or we're to make a proposal, whatever, and see you in 2 weeks. And the third one that I think we'll probably hit on the most today is that the intent of what the designer or the architect was putting forward was not in line with the developer's perspective. And I think we're going to hit on that a lot today. And that again is some of the things that we like preach inside of Arcol is like, how do we break down those barriers of communication where if you're talking about X and the developer's talking about Y, like how do we match those two things up so you're both speaking the same language?
Yeah, and frankly, like what we're going to talk about here will be very helpful for all of your work that you're doing, but we're just going to frame it, specifically kind of through the perspective of developers because in my opinion and probably in my experience, working with clients too, like that do developers, like they are the most different, I think, than anyone else because it's just such a hard line. It's such a hard line between like talking to a homeowner and talking to a developer. Those are very different discussions and conversations, and things that matter more. So when it comes to putting together proposals, in my experience, I think most architects are kind of submitting proposals thinking that developers are evaluating things like design quality, right? What we know is that that's almost never what's actually happening, right? They're actually asking, does this team, does this firm, does this architect understand what could go wrong and can they help me avoid it? Are they going to help to protect what I actually want to achieve? And so, Aaron, I'm curious. I would love to talk a little bit more about what developers actually worry about, what their pain points are, what their risks are, because they're the things that are top of mind going into a project for sure, right? Because they want to these risks, these pains, these struggles are going to get in the way of what matters most to them, which is the profit margin, right? It's going to be what they actually get at the end of the day.
Yeah, 100%. And so Tyler and I kind of like put our heads together. Like the resource that we'll send after this is like a little cheat sheet for you, and we're gonna kind of get into what that is. But we basically came up with 6 categories of risk that 99% of developers, like what they're going to be thinking about, will fall into those categories. And just as like a brief aside, like I mentioned at the top, my experience in software and software sales and working for a long time in that, it's it's exactly the same thing with a different context. We had the exact same playbook that I ran at various different software companies where the risks and what we were trying to figure out was different, but you would go into every call, every discovery with a list of like 5 or 6 things that you know that they're going to care about, and you would make sure that you didn't leave that call before you asked about those things. And the reason that you can do that is so that you can turn that around and speak their language and put it into your proposal. So this is a playbook that is like salesy, but it's very much rooted in that idea of just good discovery, good storytelling, making sure you're laying everything back to the client in the way that resonates for them. Um, so without further ado, the 6 kind of risks, I am going to read this here so I don't miss any here. But the kind of 6 major risk areas that we talked about, the first one I think is super obvious is cost risk. That's going to come up probably every single time. But scope creep, redesign cycles, eating into contingency, all those different things that come up with cost risk, a timeline risk. So whether that's like permitting delays or when the actual construction starts, how that fits into your plans. A really, really big one is approval risks. So I think this is maybe not always discussed as much, but from most of the developers that I talk to, that's the one that keeps them up at night is like, great, go through the proposal, get the design, all the way to the finish line, getting ready to start. And then we find out about a zoning variance that we didn't cover or what have you. That's a huge, huge thing that they want to make sure is addressed. Design uncertainty is the fourth one. And I think that's more talking about the market and ensuring that whatever unit mix you come up with or whatever, um, you're putting forward with the design actually matches the demand of the market. And the fifth and sixth ones, I think, are a little bit softer, but fall into how you're going to work with them. The first one is just coordination risk. I want to work with a design partner that I understand how I'm going to work with them. And that gets back to that black box problem that a lot of them talked about. It's no one wants to work with a partner that says, great, I got the stuff, see you in 2 weeks and we'll talk then. They want to understand what that actually looks like. And then the last one is just market or exit risk. And I think that's the one that's kind of the softest. It's, I would say, probably the least in your control as an architect, but it's also a good thing to ask about. Like, what are their actual goals here? If, you're talking with somebody who has a, exaggerated probably for most use cases, but 100-year window of what they're looking to do with the property versus like trying to flip this in 5 years, it's going to be a dramatically different situation of how they're approaching those initial conversations. So I think those are kind of the 6 main risk areas: cost, timeline, approvals, design uncertainty, coordination, market or exit risk.
And why it's important, like this is the foundation of the entire conversation that we're going to be having, y'all, because you have to start with these risks. And I think being able to categorize them, being able to break them down and know where they're going to fall into is super important. It also makes it just easier for you to drive the conversation. So we'll talk about how to understand how they're dealing with these risks in a second. But I just want to harp on this again, just for a moment, that understanding these risks is exactly how we're going to translate your value, right? So like there's risk on one side of that, and you protecting that is the value that you offer, right? It's a lot more than just design. You can see like design uncertainty was literally just one of these risks, right? And probably the least important one to most developers, right? But there's so many other ones. So I'm curious. We just covered them really quickly, right? So we have cost risk, we have timeline, we have approvals, we have design, we have coordination, and we have market or exit risk. In your experience, that is the ones and twos in here, right? In your experience, which of the 6 risks do you think developers care about the most, right? In your experience, we got cost, timeline, approval, design, coordination, market. Angie says cost. Paul says cost. I'm assuming that's what that means, Paul. Jacqueline, your last name's Tyler. That's cool.
Cool. Timeline.
Um, timeline, cost, and timeline.
Yep.
No one's surprised here. Yeah. Good point. Restudio. Yeah. Cost, but the other risks affect cost. Yes.
Yep.
You're exactly right. It's almost like this could be a pyramid to a certain extent, Aaron.
Well, I was gonna say, like, I think that the big brain answer here is that, and it's kind of a little bit of a cop out, but those like spider web diagrams where it's like you're touching one point all the way and the other one you're just touching it a little bit. The real answer here is that every developer is going to have a certain shape of risk that they care about. Usually cost is going to be the one that's like maxed out quite a bit.
Yeah.
But they're going to care about all of these things to
Yeah.
some extent. And that's why part of what we're going to talk about is like, how do you unearth and make sure that you cover all of these things? Because even if you nail it on assessing cost risk, making them feel comfortable there, but you don't touch approvals at all, that's going to lower your win rate, right? You need to touch all of the things that is on their radar.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's also the regional differences too. Like Craig was saying, California approval risk is big, and I
100%.
I hear that a ton from my clients in California too. So, different regions. Someone was dropping in here for Colorado. Yeah, Jay was mentioning Colorado approval and timeline, and then cost. So, they are all, to your point, Aaron. They're all interconnected. However, they're handled differently, right? Each one is handled differently. And so, in order for you as the architect to identify which risk is most important to them or which one they're most worried about, we want to make sure that we are driving that conversation forward appropriately, right? And so, this is where the conversation that leads up to you actually putting together a proposal, in my experience, is actually the thing that wins or loses more projects than not, right? Because if you only focus on scope of services, if you only focus on kind of quantitative information, you're actually going to miss the huge part of the conversation, which is like understanding what their priorities are, understanding what their risks are. And so what we've done is we've taken each risk and we've tied it together with a question that you can ask during like the discovery phase, during those initial conversations, to begin to unearth and understand the role that a particular risk is kind of playing for this specific project. Did I say that right, Aaron? I think I did.
Yeah.
That sounds good. All right, so let's go through each one of these. And again, we have this all together in a playbook for you that's going to be breaking down everything that we're talking about. So we'll talk about how to get that at the end. So when it comes to cost risk, right? These are the scope creep, the change orders, material cost surprises, all these redesign cycles that are eating into their margins, eating into their contingency. So cost risk is you're chatting with them and you're saying, hey, in your experience, when a project does run over cost, what are the most common causes, right? It's probably going to be the same answers. But here's what's important about this, right? Because I can already hear, I think, some experienced firm owners in here being like, I already know what the answer is. That almost doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that you know what the answer is. The important thing is that they are telling you, right? That they're literally saying it out loud, that they're voicing that concern. That's more important, actually, than the fact that you might already know what the answer is. Because we want to get that out on the table so that it's clear that you understand said risk, right? And that you've actually pulled out to them, like pulled it out from them that that's something that they care about, right? So when it comes to cost, super easy one, right? Hey, just in your experience, when a project does run over cost, what are the most common causes, right? And this shows that you're thinking about money before design, which is important for them, right? And it gets them to tell you exactly where past projects went sideways. They're probably going to have some, war stories, horror stories, and things like that, just so that you can actually use those specific examples later on when you're putting together that proposal to make sure that you are protecting them from said bad experience again. And then when it comes to timeline risk, right? When does the project need to be completed? This is such an important question, right? But the more important one is the one that comes after this, right? So when does a project need to be completed? And what is the importance of that date, right? You need to know both of these questions. It's not just enough to know when they want the project to be completed, right? Listen to the framing. When does it need to be completed and why, right? What's the importance of that date? And the reason that you need to understand this is because sometimes, as we know, right, the date can just be arbitrary, you know, and if it's an unrealistic date, then that's something that we can work with the client on, right, to make sure that we're putting together something that is actually feasible, in terms of happening. But the other part of that is that it might be playing into the risk in terms of, they need it for financing terms, right? In order to hit some of their goals there. Or if it doesn't happen, then there's, I don't know, there's an additional cost. This usually comes down to financing, right? But there's an additional cost that's going to hit them harder, right? And so you just want to make sure that you understand that and understand what you're protecting on the side of the timeline as well. And then when it comes to approvals, right? What kind of challenges are you anticipating with planning and approvals? And what this is going to tell you is actually how much experience and knowledge they have, right? In this process. Now, most developers, like they're not, you're probably not going to be you. I mean, sometimes you might be working with a developer that hasn't done this before, right? But even if they've only done it a few times, all of you here in the room, you are the experts on this, right? You literally do this every single day. You do this 5 times, 10 times, 20 times a year, right? Depending on the type of work that you do. You understand these planning and approval processes more than anyone else that you're speaking to, right? So you just want to get a sense for their understanding of how it works, especially when we're talking about somewhere like where Craig's at, in California, right? Very different process, very different, very slow, very elongated process, right? So getting an understanding of how of what their experience with that has been in the past and what they're actually expecting is important. When it comes to design uncertainty, right? What actually drives your design decisions and what type of experience do you want to create for the users? This is the architecture question, right? What's going to drive your design decisions? You might find out right from the get-go, by the way, that it's budget, right? Or you might find out that it's something else, right? What kind of experience do you want to create for the users? Do they want it to be a luxury experience? Do they want it to be the top of the market? Should this be unique in different ways? And this is going to help to play into your strategy and how you are actually presenting your solution to them. The other important thing about asking questions like this, though, and I feel like this is worth it to say around the design question, Aaron, is just that you might find out that these people aren't a fit for you, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Like if you don't want to work with a developer that will be making all of their decisions based on budget, one, I don't blame you. But two, you find out way earlier than like the middle of the project where they've burned out the team and you're not happy working with them, right? So it's really important to do this discovery process for both ways. You want to make sure that you can help them in the best way, right? That you're going to be able to position your value appropriately. But you also want to make sure that you're avoiding working with a client that's just, not going to be a good fit for you and that you and your team aren't going to enjoy working with. All right, we've got two more here: coordination risk and market exit risk. So, on the coordination side, right, what's your ideal way to coordinate and communicate with architects throughout the project? What is your ideal way to communicate and coordinate with architects throughout the project? This might seem like a silly question, but it is not, because I can guarantee you, out of all of the questions that you have here, probably maybe cost risk might get you more, but this question is actually going to tell you everything that you need to know about the experience that they want in working with you, because they're going to tell you everything that's been wrong about any architect that they've worked with in the past. That's what's going to come out here, right? They're going to tell you everything that they didn't enjoy, everything about architects going in the dark, about not responding, about not listening to or designing around their priorities, right? You're going to hear all of these things. And I think the answer to this question, perhaps behind cost, is going to be one of the most important answers that you get, because then we go into the market and exit risk, which is just simply, what are your plans for the project and what return are you looking to achieve? What are your plans for the project? What return are you looking to achieve? Like Aaron was saying, big difference between someone that's going to buy the land, hold after it's completed, right? And they're doing a long-term investment versus a developer that's looking to flip and sell, pretty much immediately, right? And they also want to be at the high end of the market. What you're pulling out of all of these, right, is what their experience around these risks has been, what their knowledge is of these risks, right? And then also what comes on the other side of risk is just like the priority, right? Probably in some of these answers, they're just going to outright tell you what their priorities are. So I'm curious, right? Aaron, do you have a sense for which of these questions developers tend to get most excited about?
Um, yeah, I'm gonna cop out on this one,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna say all of them, which is a brutal cop out. But I want to explain myself because I do hate when people say things like that. But kind of the story that I was talking about a little bit earlier, and all the conversations that we have with developers, um, I can already tell you that, like, again, from my experience and what I've heard from the other side of the fence, is like some of these questions, I can guarantee there are people on this webinar right now that are like, yeah, I know. Like that's the question, and you ask it, and then they're not going to ask it. I can just guarantee that because it's human nature, right? Like you don't want to just like rattle people off with 6 questions like this. But from the developer perspective, if you are asking all of these questions, if you're layering it out in some way or whatever way feels natural to you, you are understanding their why. You are getting to the core of their project and what they're trying to achieve. And it might be as simple as like, I want to maximize my profit in the short term, which is like a pretty common answer, I think. Um,
Yeah.
but you have a better sense of what their project is. And again, from my conversations, my sense is I'm pulling this number out of the air, but I'm going to guess that 80% of the architects that developers talk to do not ask these questions, or at least they don't answer all of them. So they are going into the proposal with an incomplete picture of what they actually care about. So again, I think the prevailing wisdom here is like, yes, obviously ask about cost risk. That's probably the most common. But I think the cop out answer here is like make sure that you're covering your bases across at least these 6 areas. And that's going to give you a pretty good sense of what the actual shape of the project is for them.
It's a really good point around most architects aren't going to want to ask all of these questions. So actually, just so that you all know, thanks for bringing that up, Aaron, because you can frame this up so that it's not awkward, so that it doesn't feel like an interview process where you are
Yes.
just like grilling them with a bunch of questions, right? And that can happen at the beginning of the conversation, at the beginning of the call. Like, hey, my goal here is just to make sure that I fully understand everything that you're looking to do with this project and the risks that are associated with it. So I just want to spend a few minutes asking you some really targeted questions so that I understand what matters most to you. Does that sound fair?
Yep.
Yes,
Yep.
that sounds fair, right? So, like, whenever you see a list of questions like this, you can always control it, right? You can always control the expectations just simply by telling them what's about to happen. Because to your point, if you just start asking them these questions one by one, it's not going to feel very authentic, casual, right?
No.
So just
No.
like frame them up, like just let them know that this is what's about to happen, and so there's just things that you want to understand, so that, right, you want to frame it so that you best understand how you can help them, right? So that you best understand where you can offer the most value to them.
No. And 100%, like that is 100% the way to do it. And the other thing that I was going to say is what Tyler said at the top of like before all these questions, which I think is so key here, is like, even if you think you know the answer, even if they've already told you at a previous time, ask the question again. And it's not necessarily that the answer is for you. It's also partly for them so that they know, okay, so and so is thinking about my timeline, my approvals, whatever. They're already ahead of this. They're on top of their game. It's going to put you in a different light. I guarantee it.
Yeah. So let's talk about the most common fallout points. Thanks, Kate. Yes, framing is probably the most important thing, honestly, when it comes to this, and that's actually what we're about to dive into, because there's a few fallout points that if you're here, if you're listening, and if you're thinking back to past proposals or conversations that you've had with developers, right? One fallout point is just not asking these questions at all, right? Another fallout point is asking these questions and then just completely, completely forgetting them when you go put together your proposal. Like, you ask these questions, you have an amazing conversation with the developer, and then you just go back to your standard template and put together some numbers and then send it over to them, right? That is a huge, huge, huge mistake that literally just like nullifies everything that you just learned about them. So, what's important about this process is that you are learning as much information as possible from them about their priorities, about the risks associated with the project. And you're now going to take those top risks and those top priorities and make them kind of like the main point of your proposal process so that you are speaking their language. And so we do this through something called a risk priority proof package or statement. I don't know. Maybe I kind of want to call it a package because it RPP. Everyone here knows that I love using acronyms, so I kind of want to like RPPP or something. The risk priority proof package. And so what I would say is that what you do is that from each answer, you identify the risk that they told you during discovery, and then you have to acknowledge what that risk is actually protecting in terms of their priority, right? Is it protecting a financial return? Is it protecting the timeline? Is it protecting investor confidence? Like what is it? What is that thing that it's actually protecting? And then you want to provide proof, which is going to be a specific example, right? Or a specific plan that shows that you've solved this before, or that shows that you have a plan of attack for it so that that priority does stay protected, right? And this is so important because what typically happens is that you don't frame any of this up, and you kind of either you send off the proposal, which is the worst thing. I hope that no one here is doing that. Like, please present your proposals in person. So either you send off the proposal, or you meet with them to go over the proposal, but you kind of just go straight to the pricing page, right? What this is going to cost, what it's going to be. You want to get their buy-in on your process, on the project itself, on the things that matter most to them before you ever show them price, right? Before you ever show, I would even say before you ever show them the design too, by the way. Like you want to make sure that they are bought into this idea of working with you and that they're bought into the idea that you can actually solve and protect their primary priorities. So, how does this work? For each risk, you want to name what the risk is, you want to identify what it's protecting, and you want to share just one quick sentence of a past project and the outcome that provided for your past client. We'll talk about also what to do just in case you don't have a specific example, too. But I want to run through an example of this. So, for example, right, let's say that a developer, actually, I want to pull it up here so that I'm not missing it. So let's say that a developer tells you that the last project that they did actually went 15% over budget because of change orders that happened during the construction. This doesn't sound abnormal at all, right? And this is, I'm pretty sure, something that we hear all the time, right? So the priority behind that is pretty simple. They just want cost predictability, right? They don't want surprises to happen after they've committed, because change orders are, I mean, you can anticipate change orders to a certain extent, but you can, I mean, you can definitely control them with better processes, better drawings, things like that. So your proof statement might sound something like, hey, so I know that you mentioned the experience that you just had with that last project where it actually went 15% over budget because of all of those change orders. On a recent project that we actually did with a multifamily project, we were able to reduce the change orders by 60% just by running a full constructability review right before the CD phase. And we build that into every project timeline now because it's one of the most effective ways that we've found to protect your budget, right? Just like that. So we are calling out the specific example that they mentioned. We are describing a past event, and we are making sure that we're framing it around what that outcome was, for them, right? That budget was actually protected, right? So you share a little bit of the mechanism. Notice you don't have to share that much. It's not a ton about the process. You're not walking them through step by step exactly how it happened. But what you're doing is that you're showing them that you are listening, right? You're acknowledging that you have a way forward, and you're mentioning and kind of reminding them of what matters most relative to that risk, right? It's that priority. It's protecting that budget. Aaron, what would your response be to that if you're putting on your developer hat?
I think you need to trademark the risk priority proof framework or playbook or whatever you call it. 'Cause it hits the nail on the head. And I like, as you're walking through that, the example that came to mind is, again, this is a conversation I have almost every month, but I can think of the exact conversation last month that I had talking with a developer who was talking about proposals and working with architects. And they literally ranted about, I can't remember what percent they said, over half, let's say, of the proposals that they get start with proof. And so it's usually like, hey, client, we made this proposal for you. XYZ architecture firm has been doing this for 50 years, and we have all these projects, and it's just page after page after page. And it's like you've led with proof of like, well, what you think is proof and credibility, and you've skipped over the part and you've already lost them right out of the gate because that's how everybody talks. But if you start and you lead with their risk, you're already framing everything around what they care about. You show them that you unpack it with priority of here's what that tangibly means for you. Then you go into very specific proof. Whereas I think that one of the more common like pitfalls that I hear from my side is that architects feel like they need to lead with proof, lead with credibility of what they've done. But that's just kind of how you fall into the same bucket as everybody else, rather than what Tyler just laid out there.
Well, to your point, it's like it's not that proof is bad, right? It's that
No, no,
credibility and proof needs context,
exactly. Yeah.
right? And this is also, by the way, a huge mistake that I often see on proposals that like will share case studies or past projects. It's like that doesn't matter unless you are literally explaining and describing to that client why it matters, right? You have to describe why it matters. That's essentially what we're doing here. Like you could even imagine on the proposal itself, you might have a picture of this past project up there, like just so that you can reference it, just so that you have an image to speak to while you're talking about it. But the more important thing is that you are contextualizing. That's a word, right? I hope it is.
It is.
That you are contextualizing the importance of that project, right? And why it matters and why it's relevant to them. So another example of this would be the developer mentions that their last architect went dark for weeks at a time, right? And they came back with the designs that were really missing the mark relative to the conversations that they were having. This is also not uncommon. These architects, they, when architects do this, by the way, they are just killing our industry. Like they're putting out a bad example of how amazing architects can actually be, right? So the priority for this is communication and transparency, right? It's coordination. It's making sure that they feel like they're involved and they know what's actually happening in the project, and the trust that what has been discussed will actually be executed, right, in the way that it was agreed upon. So they really want to feel like they're in the loop, and they want to feel like you are working together on these plans, even though you guys as architects are designing it, right? But they want to feel involved and in the loop, at least if this is the risk that they came up with. So your proof statement, right? Hey, I know that you were mentioning before that one of the architects you've worked with in the past kind of went dark and when they came back. It was just really missing the mark. Every project that we take on includes a bi-weekly review cycle where you see the progress in real time. And we've actually found that this cuts revision cycles in half because we're catching misalignment early instead of, 3 months or at the end of every single phase. How does that align with the experience that you're looking for? Right. Always end that with a question, which I think is good too. So, what's important here is that there are two ways to say this. There's one way to say this, which takes 10 minutes, right, for you to explain it. Right. And that's you diving very deep into the mechanism, into exactly how this is working, into how it played out before, and into a long discussion about how that can map back to them. That's one way to do it. The other way is literally just to say this in like 2 sentences, like I just showed you there, right? I highly recommend that you just focus on saying that in like 1 or 2 sentences. Everyone has shorter attention spans now. It's like it's only getting shorter. There's very clear data that points to that. So you just want to make sure that what you're saying is clear, it's concise, and it gets right to the point that matters most to the developer. Now, for the question that's in the back of your mind, right? So let's say you don't have a specific example, right? That's okay. One, hopefully this is also making you think back to different types of data, different types of kind of value you can pull from your past projects and how you can reframe that value that you provided towards these risks and the things that matter most to developers. But if you don't have something, if you don't have a specific example, that's okay. Just make sure that you have a plan, right? That you have a solution, right? You mentioned that this needs to be completed by Q4. So we're actually going to prevent delays by doing X, Y, and Z, which is going to leave some space to be done, at least a few weeks before then, right? So have a plan, have something that you can say that's addressing that. Again, keep it short and sweet. It doesn't have to be long. You don't have to walk step by step through how that process is going to work. But the important thing is that you are acknowledging and addressing how you're going to tackle that and how you're going to protect that priority for them. Aaron, I feel like I've been talking for too long, but what do you think?
No, no, I'm nodding along because you're stealing all my points, but that's fine. While you were talking, there's a famous quote from a writer. I can't remember which one it is, but it's something to the effect of like, "I wish I had the time to write short, short form, but I don't, so I write long form," right? And I
Yeah,
think that from my conversations and the perspective that I've seen, that definitely shines true for almost every developer that I work with, that they see when you are presenting long form, throwing out case studies. It's like you're doing that and presenting these long form evidence because you haven't necessarily done the work that allows you to do short form risk priority proof type frameworks of saying exactly what you're going to deliver. So you're just trying to throw evidence at them,
yeah.
or proof at them. And again, from my experience, developers can sniff that out like a mile away, or at least they have the perspective of it. And that puts the proposal in a very, very different light. If you lead with all of that proof, but haven't necessarily unpacked it for their context, you're just basically throwing content at them.
I agree. We got 2 questions in here from Steve and Andrew. Just want to make sure I address them really quick. So Steve was wondering, how is this process different from crafting proposals for other clients when the process worked the same for anyone? Um, Mostly, Steve. I think it's mostly true. I do truly believe that you might have a standard process in place for how you are putting together proposals. But I do think that each client, right, is going to have a different need. They're going to have different priorities. They're going to have different risks associated with that project. So the way that it actually comes together might look a little bit different each time. However, yes, generally I highly recommend doing this, right? You want to make sure that you're identifying what matters most, what the priorities are, and that those kind of become the key feature, the key point of your proposal before you ever get to the pricing. So yes is the short answer to that, or mostly I guess would be the short answer. And then Andrew was asking, as I understand, for proof, architects need to have systems and processes for each risk management. Is this more or less correct?
I feel like
I
I can take
mean,
that. Like definitely that's the goal of what we're talking about here. And the follow-up resource that we're going to send is kind of like a package of this. But again, this is like not overly different than other sales processes. It's go into every conversation with a cheat sheet of what you need to ask to uncover that proof. And I like when I was doing sales in a different context, I would literally have a sheet with 5 things and I would check them off as we went to make sure as a visual indicator for me, did I ask about this? Am I going to be able to unpack this later down the wall or down the line? And I think that's really what we're going for here.
yeah. I think it's different. I mean, Andrew, my only caveat to that would be like, do you need systems or processes for each risk management? You probably already have them, right? Whether you call them a system or a process is another thing. I think the more important thing in this context, what we're talking about here, which is basically how you're going to communicate that, is that you have a very clear, concise, consistent way of explaining how you manage each of those risks. At this point, that's actually more important than the process itself, right? Because that will, I mean, that's kind of on the project delivery side of things. Like you will do that, and it might not be as unchaotic as the way that you explain it, right? But as long as you're able to actually deliver, right, on the promise that you make in this, on the proof statement itself, then the more important thing is how you are communicating that clearly. Because what actually most architects are doing, to your point, Steve, is just that they're doing it, but they're not even saying that they're doing it, right? Like you do, everyone here has a way to manage all of these risks, right? So this isn't anything new. It's not like that's not the problem. The problem is that you're doing it and you're not even saying it, right? You're not even describing this value. You are literally leaving money, you're leaving value, you're leaving revenue on the table because you're not speaking the client's language, right? So that's what we want to help you with here. Aside from winning more, we also want you to be able to charge more for that too, for that work that you're doing. Aaron, we get to kind of the fun part here in my opinion, which is
Yeah.
this idea of breaking the wall, right? So we've talked about how to get the right information out of the developer. We've talked about how to then frame what you get back towards what matters most to them, back towards how you are providing that value to them. Now let's actually talk about this idea of breaking the wall, right? Which is just basically what happens that, the proposal is just one part of this. But I actually want to talk to you about what you guys are seeing at Arcol when firms are going to promote, right? Or they're going to actually present these proposals because there's different ways of doing it. There's the way of like, okay, we kind of just have a conversation, right? We don't show anything and we kind of hope that you move forward. But there's other firms that, as you know, they're actually like doing some work ahead of time before they put together this proposal. What does that look like for you, or what have you seen?
Yeah, so we kind of talked about this. This is kind of Arcol's bread and butter of breaking down the wall between these two groups. And I think we divided it into before you're hired and after you're hired as like kind of the two use cases here. But all of these come from Arcol clients. This isn't necessarily anything that like we've patented or pushed or anything. Like this is how people are actually using Arcol to win work right now. The first one that we talked about is before you get hired. So I think the caveat here that I'm sure Tyler will hit on too is like this is not advocating for doing free work. Don't do free work. Like you don't need to do that necessarily. But if you're doing work before you get hired with a developer, one thing that a lot of our clients are doing is setting the expectation of using a tool like Arcol. Obviously, I would advocate for using Arcol, but there are other tools out there to set the expectations of how you're going to work. One of the like most common things that I hear is it's kind of funny, like developers seem to hate Revit as much as many architects also hate Revit because they view it very much as like a black box tool where it's like, I know I can't get in there. I know that's your thing, and I'm not going to be able to see this project work in process. A lot of our clients are creating a separate project inside of Arcol to say like, hey, here's a link. We're going to drop in updates every day, every 2 days, every 3 days, whatever. So you're in the loop consistently. You just have to go to this link. You don't have to wait for any emails. You don't have to wait for PDFs. You don't have to do anything. And again, there's going to be a degree of comfort with everybody there of like what those timelines actually look like and how open you want to be. But I think that's a pretty cool way without doing any work necessarily to just set the expectation of how we work is we'll send you this link. That link will be updated every X period of time, and you'll be able to see in real time how things are moving along. It just, developers are going to get 5 different proposals that look exactly the same. If yours is the sixth one that's saying, hey, here's how we work and here's how it's different, you're immediately going to stand out.
I think what's important here relative to what you're saying is like, yes, that last thing that you said is actually most important. It's going to look different, right?
Mhm.
It's going to look different and it's going to be framed around something that they care about, right? It's something that they're going to be able to play with. Like you're just going to stand out uniquely simply because of that. And a tool like Arcol, it makes it easy to put something together like this in an hour or two, right? And so this is what I mean. Like, no, do not do work for free. But also, if you can put together something that's directly related to what they were saying, to what it is that they want to do, and it takes a couple of hours, and it's for a contract that's going to be worth probably 6 to 7 figures for your firm,
Yeah.
probably worth it. Like to give
Yeah.
it a shot, it's a super easy way to stand out, and I think
And
we can't let that pass by.
100%. And I'll give like just context. I don't want to like reveal all the the client secrets here, so I'm going to choose my words carefully here. But one of the firms that we work with, and again, like I can hear, there will be different contexts for everybody. So take this within your own context and what would be useful for you here. But one of the things that one of our clients does is when they're working with a developer that they have a really close relationship with, when projects are going out, they basically say, okay, you're looking at this project, we're going to load it for you in Arcol. So basically, Arcol is a browser-based design tool to add in site context and zoning restrictions is literally 3 clicks, I think. It will take you 10 seconds. But they
Mhm.
send that to the client and say, here's the project that we're looking at. We're going to build this out for you. But the client gets something within 5 minutes of talking to the architect. And it just puts them in a different light to say, like, hey, we have something representative for you here. Here's the place that we're working on. It's literally just site context. You don't have to do any work, but you're already showing them that you're going to work differently than anyone else that they're working with because you're putting something in front of them that's tangibly or tangible right away.
What I love about that is that this idea that after you do have a developer that you work with, and that once they've experienced this for one, they're going to be very disappointed with any other relationship that they have with architects that aren't using Arcol, right, or something
Mhm.
like that. But the other
Yeah.
thing is that it actually makes it really easy. There's this notion in sales about like assumptions, right? Assuming the close. You should always kind of be assuming the close. You always want to be guiding them forward towards the next obvious step.
Mhm.
And with something like Arco, where you can do that, right? It's someone that you've worked with, someone that you trust, someone that you're going to continue working with, that they bring you another potential project and you can so quickly just send it over to them, right? Just with the context and knowing kind of what the what's feasible on that site. Pretty great, right? Again, very good.
Yep.
Like it's not going to be worth their time to go and try to find another architect. It's just not. They're obviously going to work with you.
Yep.
Um, so that's amazing. What about in the instance um, that you might not want to show any of this information beforehand, but Arco still comes into play after the proposal is won? What's that look like?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I'm looking at the clock here. I don't know if we'll have time to do this, but I'm happy to show folks what that looks like in Arcol just to like kind of help paint the picture here if we do have time afterwards. But after we've started working with clients and typically what we see inside of Arcol, again, everything in Arcol is browser based. And so it moves away from this idea of PDFs and emails and that slow chain of feedback. So the number one thing that we hear from developers, or one of the highest things, is that it's a black box between those email cycles. Because you can control the environment that developers can see inside of Arcol, you literally can get an email from them with obviously an oversimplified example, but saying, add a floor to this building. You can just do it. Their link is updated. All their numbers are updated. Your presentation is updated. It's all staying in sync because Arcol just automates that work for you. So the biggest change that we find after your work is, sorry, I'm just keeping an eye on the chat at the same time.
Yeah,
Thanks
sorry,
for
I'm
dropping the link
responding.
there.
Everyone's like, "What are we talking about?" It's like,
Yeah,
"What?"
yeah, yeah. The
Um,
biggest thing that we see there is just shortening feedback cycles, and that's obviously a win for everybody in every context, but developers in particular, just having that visibility into the project as well.
yeah, Yeah, I think that's really important. This coordination, right? The tighter that your relationship can be with any of the clients that you're working with, right? The more that they feel involved, this is also the psychological term for this is going to be the IKEA effect, right? If you're
Mhm.
wondering why IKEA, one of the reasons that IKEA is so incredibly popular, even though you literally have to buy something that you're going to put together, right? It's that that thing feels more valuable to you because you spent time putting it together, right? Because
Mhm.
you feel involved, you feel some kind of authorship in the creation of that. And the same thing can happen with something like Arcol, right? They feel involved. They've been monitoring. They're leaving comments in there, right? They're asking questions inside of there, so they can actually they have something towards the end that they can point to and be like, "Hey, I recommended this, right? Or this came
Yep.
about from a conversation that I had with an architect." And so they feel so much more involved in that process. They feel so much more ownership, authorship towards it, which, by the way, is amazing for you, right? Right? They're going to want to
Yeah.
work with you again.
Um, just because we're getting a lot of questions here, I'm gonna go off script for a second here. Is
Do
that
it.
cool, Tyler? Am I allowed to steal it?
You can go off script, and then while that's happening, I'm going to answer one of Corey's questions up here, which is that she was talking about, and hey, Corey, great to see you in here. Um, she was talking about a lot of, or sorry, many of the developers that she's connected with require an emailed proposal and no meeting. I think this is just for context. I think this sucks. Like you
Yeah.
should be able to have a meeting with the clients.
Yeah.
However, in this case, Corey, what I would say is that you should assume, based on your experience, what those risks are, right? You should still bring them out. Like you should look at the site, you should identify the two or three risks that, based on your region, based on the site itself, based on what you know, and based on your experience, are probably the most probable risks, of getting in the way of, or of, yeah, of getting in the way of what their goal is on that project, and still bring them forward in your proposal, right? So it
Yep.
still happen in the same way. It's just, instead of you hearing it directly from them, you're going to have to assume it. You're going to have to bring it up. You're going to have to, the framing of that's going to be a little bit differently, just in the sense that, I noticed that on this site, there's XYZ problem, and we're probably going to have to get a variance, right? This is how we tackle that to make sure that it doesn't happen later on. So bringing
Yeah.
that up ahead of time is going to be important.
100%. So just to ground some of this in context, again, we're going to follow up after and I'll send over links. And if anybody has any questions about Arcol, I'm happy to chat about that. This session was meant to be for y'all and just kind of sharing war stories from the other side. But obviously we have some experience working with folks from other sides. So I'll just show you really quickly kind of two of the quick examples. And I'm actually curious to stress test our tool. I think there's 90 people on the stream. I've never had more than like 20 people in an Arcol file, but we'll give it a
Oh,
go
let's
here
do
and
it.
see what happens. So this is kind of the workflow that I was talking about previously of like almost requiring no work, but showing value immediately. This is the first screen that you see inside of Arcol. You can come in here, pick your site, and grab a real site parcel. So that's the first thing that you're going to do. And it's literally 2, 3 clicks to get here. You're going to bring in live site context. And then you can see when I grab my actual site that I selected here, I can already bring in zoning info. And that's it. So 2, 3 clicks, that's all you have to do. And you can send this to your client, like I'm going to send to all of you right now with like a view only access. And again,
Let's
we'll see
break
what
it. Let's
happens
break
here.
Arcol.
Let's see if we can break it with 90 people jumping into the same model. But you all should be able to jump into this and you'll kind of see the experience of what a client actually gets. So I see all of you jumping in here. They're in the model, they can feel what's happening. And again, I haven't done a proper illustration of what Arcol can do. But if, for example, you wanted to say like, be totally open kimono and start, drawing things, the architect or the client, I should say, is going to be able to see those things happen in real time. So I start making a building here. They can start to see those numbers populate in Arcol all at the same time.
Hmm.
And again, this is, kind of a wishy-washy 30-second demo here, but properly when you're building this out, you'd have a set file that you would give access to the client to. They can jump into it to see updates anytime. They can jump into our documentation layer. They can leave comments. But the point of all of this is you're breaking down the wall between you and the client. So as you start to get in here and you start building out things like floor plans and all the other things that you want to, pay attention to at any stage of a project, they're going to be included inside of that vision for you as well. So again, I'm just kind of mucking around a little bit here. I can do a proper demo for anybody anytime. But if you want to jump into here and start seeing things, you can see we're already starting to calculate all the data, all the numbers that they'd start to care about. And you can add in zoning requirements and budget and parking requirements. And I'm already talking too long and I want to leave time for questions. So There you go. That's Arcol in 10 seconds.
What I love, I had to take a screenshot of it because we had, I think, 43 people in here or something, like 45
And
people
it
in here.
didn't crash.
So it didn't crash. So that's pretty good. Still moving super fast, at least on my end, which is
Yeah.
amazing for a browser-based software. All right, y'all. So here's actually to even go beyond what Aaron's talking about here. This is what we are going to send you, right? So you're going to get an email soon, Aaron, shortly after this.
Yep.
Is that when it's going to
Yep.
happen?
Later this
Okay,
afternoon for
cool.
sure.
Yeah. You're going to get an email this afternoon. That's the subject line is going to say, Arcol, your proposal playbook is here. That's what it's going to say. Arcol, your proposal playbook is here. It's going to give you a full playbook of everything that we discussed. You're going to kind of get like the risk management. What do we call that? I forget what we called it, Aaron. Like risk management, like
There's
matrix or
a
something like that.
fancy name that I can no longer
There
remember
was
either.
there was a fancy name that we have for it, and it looks a lot nicer in there than it does than it does with
Yes.
us just like saying it. So it's going to put all of this together. It's going to give you all of the examples, different proof statements that you can use across all of the risks that we covered, so that you have examples of that. And you're also going to get a link so that you can not download, but you can jump in and start using a proposal template that we've already put together that's based on everything that we've talked about today for your next group of developers, which I think is pretty cool. So at the end of the day, right, you want to make sure that in your proposals, you are acknowledging what the developer told you in discovery. This is the most important thing, right? You're asking the right questions and you're acknowledging what you learned in discovery. You're choosing 1 to 3 of the top risks and providing proof statements that are tied to how you're going to tackle that and why it's not something, or how you're at least going to protect what the priority is behind that, right? You can provide options for moving forward. And then if the timeline is relevant, you can explain, how you're going to tackle that throughout the process. But at the end of the day, the things that matter most are protecting their priorities, right? Which you'll be able to identify from understanding those risks. Questions? I can stay on a little bit longer, Aaron, if you can. So if
Yeah, I
there's
am.
more questions, I'm
Sorry,
happy to
I'm trying
answer them.
to design at the same time here. Don't judge my design skills because I'm trying to do two things at once here, but for anybody that's still in Arcol.
Oh, you are designing. Shoot, I didn't even see that. Look at that.
I was throwing a couple things in there.
Just throwing a couple of things over here that you got,
Designing is generous,
which
but
is cool.
yes.
Are there any questions for Aaron or for myself? Is there one in the Q&A? Oh, someone coming in from Costa Mesa. Yeah, any questions, drop them into the chat. Aaron's happy to answer. I'm happy to answer any questions as well. More people are just playing around. I mean, that might be
I
happening
know.
too.
I think I may have distracted everybody too much. But yes, well, if there are questions coming in, like happy to answer those. But I will say for anybody that wants to chat through and do a proper run through of Arcol, I'm happy to show demos too or anything like that. But effectively, it's like I said, it's collaborative based design that brings modeling, presentation, and your data all into one work stream. So it should save you a ton of time and make a way better client experience.
For context, also, I'd just like to mention this. Like, Arcol is my longest standing partnership. I've been working with, they were my first partner ever, and we've actually been working together for the last 3 years. I really love what you guys are building, what you have built, what you're doing for the industry. And it does help architects win more work, which is what it's all about, right? We want to help you all have a way bigger part, way bigger piece of the pie for that built environment. All right. So Kate said, best questions for developers when your firm was shortlisted, but you didn't get it. Architects often don't know what to ask. So like, what do you ask the developers when you didn't win? Is that what you mean? I would just go back and say, um, you know, sorry to hear. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Personally, I would just go back and say, Kate, I would just say, hey, sounds like you guys found a great fit. Where did we fall short? That's what I do personally. Like, what could we have done better, or is there something that they did that stood out? It's kind of just like normal. Like, don't be afraid to ask that question because that's how you get better. By the way, just make sure you're using that feedback loop next time. Unless they say that it was just price, then I'd say no. Don't ever lower your price, please. If they say, oh, they just came in lower, then I'd just be like, all right, well, glad we avoided that bad client. um, what are the pricing options for Arcol?
Yeah, so everything that I've shown you right now is completely free. So feel free to jump in. Again, I'll just drop our website in here. Oops, if I can spell it correctly. We have a free version. I think it limits you to 3 projects, but everything that I've shown you so far is completely free. Yes, Arcol works in Spain, Europe. We have site context for everywhere in the world. The one restriction that I will say is the zoning information is only automatic in the US right now and a little bit of Canada as well.
We've got Andrew saying, finally, you guys are solving the longstanding issue of poor user experience in the AEC industry software. Could not agree more. Andrew, this thing is so blazing fast. It's kind of wild to think that, to think of what the legacy softwares have been doing. Um, ReStudio was asking, is Arcol beneficial beyond feasibility studies? I'll answer a little bit, Aaron, and then I'll let you. But like,
Yeah.
yes, this is one of the big things is that it brings documentation into here as well, so that it makes it easy, yeah, live, so that you can put together proposals like within the design software, which is pretty awesome. But Aaron, what else would you add to that?
Well, I'll show my favorite Arcol magic trick that usually makes everybody really happy. So I only showed the modeling portion of this. So if you look at this tower right now, I've made a very simple proposal inside of here of details that we've got. But if you make any changes to your model, all of your numbers, all of your visuals, all of your metrics, everything in your proposal updates in real time. So this is kind of the like magic client experience that I've talked about is literally we'll have folks that are working with a developer who will come in here and drop a client and or drop a comment and say less floors, probably something a little bit more articulate than that. But they can come in here, interact with the proposal. They can do this inside of a PDF as well if they prefer to do that. And you can come in here and say, sure, no problem, make the change, and it's done. And that is just so fundamentally different than emailing a PDF and saying, see you in a week or see you in 3 days or whatever. It's just a way shorter feedback cycle. And I think, like I said, that's fundamentally how Arcol helps teams just win more work.
Hmm, that's awesome. Yes, I love that. Huge, huge. This is different. Yeah, this is different than a PDF. This is alive. It's alive. It's a living document that you can have a conversation with someone and literally make the change right there. Do they
Yep.
stay in the history? Good question, Andrew.
You have control of that, so you can just mark it as resolved, and then you can go back and pull in unresolved comments. There's also version history, so you could pull them back up that way if you want as well.
Perfect.
And then I
Amazing,
guess,
y'all.
sorry,
This
on
is
the
this has been this has been great. Anything else you want to add? And there's probably gonna be questions, Aaron. Maybe you want to tell them like if they do want to meet with you or with the team and actually look through the product. What's that look like? Do they email you?
Yeah, well, we're going to send a follow-up email with the resources that we talked about. But if you do have any questions, I just dropped my email in the chat there. Feel free to shoot me a note. I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm pretty happy to send over any information. Usually, what I like to do is like if you want to just have me record a 1 minute demo of here's my question and can Arcol do X, Y, Z, I'm happy to do that. If you want to jump on a call and run through things properly, I'm happy to do that too.
Awesome. And then for everyone here, again, watch your inbox. You're going to get something soon that's going to say, Arco, your proposal playbook is here. It's going to be all the goodies that we were talking about. So that way, if you were taking vicious notes, if you were taking notes viciously,
Hopefully not vicious.
um, you're going to get it all in a nice little package for you as well, along with the templates. But Aaron, thank you so much for this. And everyone,
Cool.
thanks so much for being so active in there.
Yeah, this
Love
was
seeing you in
fun.
the chat. Love seeing us break the world record for a number of people in an Arcol instance.
Yeah, 100%.
Awesome. All right. We'll talk to everyone soon. See ya.
Thanks, everybody.